Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on today's webinar about the 1996 immigration laws and how we can end mass detention and deportation. Today's webinar is hosted by Freedom for Families, the Immigrant Defense Project, the Immigrant Justice Network, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, the National Immigration Project of the National Lawyers Guild, and the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center. The 1996 immigration laws have devastated our families and our communities and turned immigration law into deportation laws. Today, we'll hear from 5 individuals about the context of these laws, their impact, possible solutions, and the political opportunity for movements. Later on today, during Q&A, if you have any questions, please use the chat function and send your questions my way, and we will make sure that the speakers get to them. Additionally, if you're on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute yourself during Q&A in order to ask a question. To get started, I'd like to just introduce our speakers. We have Paromita Shah from the National Immigration Project of the National Lawyers Guild, Donald from Families from Freedom for Families, Ale, who is an immigrant and reproductive rights community organizer, Lundy Khoy, who is a criminal justice and immigrant rights activist, and Carl from the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. Up first is Paromita, who will give a background of the 1996 immigration laws and the context in which they were created. Paromita?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm really thrilled to be here today to talk about the 1996 laws. It's been a topic that many of us have been working on for some time, and I really truly feel like this is a time where there is some momentum to really move with some of the visionary recommendations in the solutions that will be presented here today, especially since the impact of the 1996 laws have been felt for so many years. Just to give some background, the 1996 laws are shorthand for 2 laws that were passed in 1996 that dramatically changed the U.S. immigration system for the worse. One was called the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, AEDPA, and the second was called the Legal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, IRA. And both of these bills together represent the immigration enforcement section of our immigration laws. Next slide. So the question is how did the 1996 laws start and how did they happen? And the story of this is a really sad one. In 1995, an American domestic terrorist, Timothy McVeigh, bombed a federal building in Oklahoma. This bombing killed 168 people and injured over 680 others. It was the deadliest act of terrorism within the United States prior to September 11th and remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in United States history. But as a result, Bob Dole, who was a Republican leader at that time, decided to use this tragedy to remake our criminal and immigration laws. So the first to come forward was AEDPA. It was designed to limit the appeals of death row prisoners. And IRA followed 5 months later. And even though these things all began in 1995, it's important to recognize that these laws followed a nationwide trend, almost a hysteria, of cracking down on quote-unquote violent crime. Through the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, which was the largest crime bill in history. The 356 pages of that bill provided for 100,000 new police officers, $9.7 billion in funding for prisons, and more for quote-unquote prevention programs. Similarly, IRA and AEDPA created black and white divisions on immigrants based on contact with the criminal justice system. Now we have a world where we have criminals versus non-criminals in immigration law, undeserving and deserving, And people who have the contact with the criminal justice system are always undeserving. And that is really a function of our 1996 laws. The 1996 laws really set the foundation for ramping up DHS as a police and prison machine. When INS began and the Immigration Naturalization Services, what was there before 2003, before the birth of DHS, INS was kind of like a $1 billion enterprise. And now DHS gets billions and billions of dollars. It has the largest federal police force in the country and a vast network of prisons and ankle monitors, which take up also billions of dollars. And this agency has deported millions since 1996. So you can see that the 1996 was really the infrastructure for all of that to move forward. Next slide. So what are the features of our 1996 laws? I think the common impact of our 1996 laws is this. They made our immigration system so severe that a single marijuana offense can be sufficient to deport a green card holder, right? A green card holder is a lawful permanent resident. And they can be deported regardless of their time in the United States, or whether they have family, whether they have very strong ties with their community, whether they have lived here for decades, whether they have been served in the U.S. military, whether they have essentially been a community member in this country, and I think that has been the overall impact. But specifically, what 1996 did is that the laws expanded mandatory detention and mandatory deportation for people with all types of criminal convictions. It expanded a type of crime, many types of crimes. It added on dozens and dozens upon dozens, frankly, lists of crimes that would lead to deportation, even if you were a long-term resident. And what it did is it treated sentences. So when people had sentences that were suspended, people had sentences where they were given a rehabilitative disposition, like told to serve different types of rehab programs. Those kinds of sentences may be treated as a conviction, even if they were dismissed later on. And that person could be deported, even if they thought they had done everything that they were supposed to do and serve their time. Most importantly, it expanded this definition of what's called an aggravated felony. And it's easy for me to say that it needs not be aggravated, need not be a felony to be an aggravated felony. And that's true. But I think what it did was expand a major class of criminal convictions so that it links everything from a minor theft offense to more serious crimes. And the problem with that is that it's so sweeping and so broad that it brings in a huge class of immigrants who will never then be able to have a defense to deportation, and really wipes out due process out of our immigration courts. These laws were meant to apply backwards and forwards. So that means if you'd committed these crimes many, many years ago, you would not get an exception. It would lead to automatic deportation, automatic deportation and detention. And one last thing is, I think what it really did was to take away the ability of federal courts to look at what could be viewed as unfair outcomes of these immigration courts, right? So let's say you had a judge who just really never believed that you had been rehabilitated no matter what, or you had a judge who really thought that interpretation of the law on your state law crime would result in deportation. It's really hard to get judicial review. It is complicated, it is difficult, and it made it impossible then for immigrants to really access the court system in any meaningful way. And because of all of this, it's kind of turned our immigration system and our immigration courts into a farce, and that it really doesn't offer due process, it doesn't offer fairness, it doesn't offer equity, it doesn't offer justice. And so it is time now, I think, for these 1996 laws to be rolled back. Thanks, Kam.
Thank you, Paromita. Up next, we'll hear from three individuals who've been impacted directly by the 1996 laws. Donald, Alejandra, and Lundy are individuals who have been impacted by the laws, and they'll talk a little bit about their stories before moving into possible solutions for their cases and what they would like to see from these specific cases. Donald? Donald, are you on mute? Donald, are you on? Okay, we'll move on to Ale for the time being and loop back to Donald.
Okay, I'm here. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hopefully Donald's okay and can join us. But hello, everyone. My name is Alejandra. I am a community organizer and been fighting my deportation case for about 8 years now. And thanks to the leadership of the organizations that are putting this webinar on, I have been able to really organize and strategize and be at the table at these conversations where we're talking about criminalization of people in the United States. Right now, every person in the US who is undocumented clearly has a target on their back. But some of us, because of our criminal record, or those labels they've been put on us, we are at a greater risk in this political moment. But it all has stemmed from the creation of the 96 laws, which we've just heard a lot about. Thanks, Paromita, for sharing. But in 2011, for me, I'm going to share a little bit about my story and my path. In 2011, I got picked up by ICE out of my probation office. I was on probation for pleading guilty to a possession of paraphernalia, which was flagged and automatically placed me at risk of deportation. Because it was a controlled substance, it also made me mandatory detention, which led me to spend 2 years in a private, for-profit prison in Eloy, Arizona. After the 2 years, I was only able to get out because of over-incarceration and paying a bond. But also living in Arizona, where we are over-policed, I also had 2 DUIs. And one of them was labeled aggravated because I had a suspended license. So again, it automatically flagged deportation for me, a brown woman, a legal permanent resident from Arizona. I was recently actually ordered deported by a judge in Tucson, Arizona, during my political asylum hearing because of that DUI in 2009. But during that courtroom, it was very interesting to me. It was very interesting to me that ICE was still bringing up charges that were dropped according, under state law, but ICE was still using them against me in my courtroom in an attempt to block me from fighting to protect myself from deportation. So regardless of my roots here, my ties, my personal transformation, I was still seen by these courts as a person who can be disposed of. My convictions have led me to mandatory detention, as I had said. It has led me to obviously mandatory automatic deportation without an opportunity to fight back because of my non-citizen status. My sentences, even though they were dismissed, some of the sentences, even though they were dismissed or suspended, again, still count towards deportation under the 96 laws. So for me, the judge, I've experienced that judges have no discretion, right? They just blame it on their hands being tied. The law, for me, I feel like it is because there's a bias, right? These judges come from being prosecutors, and they believe in this system that really isn't fair for us. So there are laws that trigger automatic deportation and that ignore people's humanity, which makes all the judges that are already there as prosecutors or retired, they have like this bias, right? And like I've experienced that bias in my courtrooms when I'm trying to fight to protect myself. We all know that immigration law currently is deportation law. And these laws are applying retroactively. Again, like I've shown, that means that they can come back with no time limitations and still throw us into this deportation pipeline. As Paromita mentioned, there is no fair trial, no due process, and that's been my experience. As a person in deportation proceedings, I offer simple solutions, honestly, and I join the folks here in this webinar that want to repeal the 96 laws and eliminate the list of crimes that trigger automatic deportation or automatic detention, as in my case. And it's very important that we also get rid of controlled substance as the deportation ground. If we want humane solutions, that means that we're gonna have to start looking at sentences differently. Not only my sentencing, but sentencing in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Ale. Next up, we have
Yes. Sorry for that. There was some factory feedback or something like that. Hello?
Whoever's doing this doesn't help.
Hi. Can anyone hear me?
yes, Donald.
My apologies. Technical issues here trying to get on. Again, as said early on, when I didn't get to go on, directed families to freedom for a moment. As you can see from the slide, we were started back in 2002 when some of our founders, their families got detained, and some of them, unfortunately, did get removed. My story is similar to quite a few people who are, well, for one, Alejandra and Lundy, some of the other guests here, green card holder, long-term resident with a criminal conviction. 18 years after that conviction, I was stopped and detained in Puerto Rico, went through the whole system trying to get bond and trying to get out, but not understanding anything at all about 1996. You can skip to the next slide. Yeah, for us, as mentioned before, the 1996 laws were massively unfair and we find to be vindictive. The two laws, IRA and ADEPA, really put serious restrictions on people like me, green card holders, so-called, admitted into the country, permanent residency and stuff like that. But it also had a massive effect on families. Folks who didn't know anything, just like in my case, about that issue of a criminal conviction to get you removed from the country, not understanding anything at all, went through the process and then realized that because the way the laws were created, in particular the retroactive manner of it, put a whole bunch of people in proceedings and ultimately led to serious deportation. Some of the things that are not necessarily pointed out in these things is the amount of people who families get separated and have left back U.S. citizen children and U.S. citizen parents. And it actually led to faction of a lot of families. The example we gave here about a father of 4 children leaving, that is ongoing. And I know everyone nowadays talk about the issue of family separation, child separation, but we hold that it is an offshoot or one of the bitter fruits of 1996 that we see that is so easily accepted that families can get separated. And yeah, we'll moan a little and cry a little, but the issues are much deeper than that. You can jump to the next slide. Oh, there goes Alex. She's all over the place, which is a good thing. But for me, Enforced Families for Freedom, the ultimate issue is 1996. And we will say yes, repeal is the goal that should be sought. Barring that is whether or not we can lop off some of the real crucial aspects. In particular, the provisions around mandatory detention and mandatory deportation. Those are some of the things that are really affecting us. While it may be hard to, at the moment, to get the conversation and narrative about repealing a law, those are some of the things that we think are necessary as it stands right now to have the effect, which is removing the provisions that call for mandatory detention and mandatory deportation and the retroactive manner of the bill. Sorry for the rush, but also just because I got on kind of. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. Up next is Lundy, who will also share her story and possible solutions for her case.
Thank you, Cam. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to all the speakers on this call to sharing their stories and their knowledge, and to Cam for moderating and putting this call together. My name is Lundy Khoy. The story I'm about to share might be new to some folks on the call. To others, you may have heard of my story before since 2012. In 2012, I decided to go public and talk about my situation with the help of SEARAC. I'd like to also share my story isn't unique. I have heard and read stories like mine on a weekly, if not daily basis. So here we go. My then pregnant mother and father fled their home country of Cambodia because of the war and genocide. This is, before I was born. Cambodia then was a war-torn country. They had no other choice but to leave in order to survive. They found refuge in a camp near the Thai-Cambodian border. It was in this camp I was born in 1980. It was a refugee camp. And 1 year later, all three of us arrived to the United States and settled in Long Beach, California. I grew up in a pretty strict Asian household. I was an obedient daughter. I followed the rules, which was mostly to study, and making friends weren't really allowed. Fast forwarding again, because we don't really have a lot of time for me to share my entire background story. I only have about 7 minutes here. When I started college in 1999, I was young. I was only 18 years old, inexperienced, and naive. I made friends that introduced me to things like beer parties and ecstasy. At the time, my dumb and naive self didn't even thought ecstasy was some illegal drug. So after one night of partying with friends, I was approached by a cop when I and my friend was leaving the metro in Virginia. This is when I was arrested for 7 pills in my bags. I was sent to jail for a couple of nights until my court date. And when I pleaded guilty, they revoked my bond, and I was in jail until my sentencing date. I was in jail for nearly 4 months. At sentencing, the judge determined I wasn't a threat to the community, nor was I some drug dealer. Instead, she stated I was just some dumb teenager and will place me on 4 years of probation. So I went on with my life. I got a full-time job. I started attending the local community college at night. 3.5 years into my probation, I was tricked into going to see my probation officer for a meeting. I liked my probation officer. She was someone I could confide in, and I was excited to show off my report card to her from school because I had all A's in school. And I wanted to share the progress with her and to show her I was improving personally, and I have learned from my mistakes that I had made years ago. But instead, I was confronted by ICE officers, so many of them. I was surprised, and I'll tell you why, because I had brought this up to my probation officer when I first met her, if I should be concerned about immigration coming to deport me. And the reason why I brought this up to her was because I learned while I was in jail that because I was not a U.S. citizen from a local inmate, that I could be deported to a country I've never been to. I've never set foot in Cambodia. My probation officer at the time told me, no, why would I be a concern for then INS? Because they have other bigger concerns than, young teenager who got caught with ecstasy. So she thought that there was not going to be any issues with this. So I was really surprised that immigration came to pick me up and then detained me for 9 months, took me away, 4 hours away from my family, where I didn't have access to any type of help. And I was stuck there until my court date. And they never really told you what was really going on. And when I did go to court, it was literally just a TV and where I could see the judge and the judge can see me. It was in a like a trailer, not even in a actual court. The judge issued a final order of removal because of my charge, which was possession with the intent to distribute. They said that that was a automatic deportation. There was no room for any compassion. And it didn't matter that I was living here, since I was 1 year old. So since 2004, I have a final order of removal. And that just sucks. So I've been living in fear. I check in with ICE regularly because I have to. But every time we go to these check-in with my husband, my family, and we're scared because of the unknowing, the fear that ICE will take me away. So, I'm on this call because just like Donald and Ale and everyone else here in the call, we want to repeal the 1996 law. It needs to be fixed. There are too many nonviolent crimes that are considered aggravated felonies. It's just way too broad. These laws are hurting the immigration community and tearing family apart. I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Lundy. And thank you, Donald and Ale and Lundy, for sharing your stories. Now we're going to move on to Caro, who will talk a little bit about the political opportunities in the 116th Congress and what we can do as a collective and as a community to move the issue forward. Caro?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can people hear me?
You're a little, it's a little difficult to hear.
Can you hear me there?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Ale, Donald, and Lee, for your stories of courage and fighting this, mass detention and deportation system that has basically criminalized behavior, right? Human behavior that we all do. But it attacks us the hardest because we don't have a quote unquote citizenship status in this country. My name is Carolina. I'm also undocumented, and I've been fighting, in the immigrant rights for the last 10 years of my life. If you want to go to the next slide, I want to talk about the opportunities that we have in the 116th sort of Congress. I feel like we, as leaders of this we're not going to take any more criminalizing of non-citizens and families in our communities. I feel like we have the opportunity to fill the gap that no one is talking about. We have probably one of the strongest and most obscure, anti-immigrant agenda under this administration. But the key here is that it's present in our daily lives because every day there's something about immigration at the federal, local, or state level that people are being exposed to. There's also a gap in narrative, right? No one knows at a mass scale the stories of Ale or the stories of Woody or the stories of Donald. Like when we engage with regular people that smoke marijuana in college, they would not know that if it not because they are protected by citizenship, that they could also be deported and removed from everything they know. I think there's also like this lack of vision, right, of what immigration law reform can truly be. I think we've been stuck as a movement in the immigrant rights movement for the last decades on who should get relief and why, like who's the good immigrant, who shouldn't get it, who's a bad immigrant. And I think it's time for us to be bold and courageous and stop that, no longer have trade-offs, and ask for something bold and say repeal everything and every part of the 96 bills, and also not replacing it. We don't want to make 96, better. We don't want it to, for DHS to open another agency, and do things quote unquote differently so that they could just rename it and keep doing what they do to our communities. I think we want these provisions in the 96 bill that I'll talk about in a little bit to completely be removed and no longer in existence. And I think also we should use this opportunity of having these voices or unique voices that we're seeing, nationally. We have Ocasio-Cortez and others in this new House of Representatives that are quote unquote carrying the voice of the left. And a lot of their narrative, for healthcare, for for climate change is being bold and visionary. Like everybody should have healthcare. Everybody, should be able to live in this earth if we do all of this climate change. And I think for immigration, yet they're missing that visionary piece. And for us, visionary means no one should be criminalized and incarcerated and deported for behavior, right? For these behaviors that they've randomly chosen to make into aggravated felonies. So I think there's space for some of these visionary voices to carry that message as well, and for us as a movement to push them to that choice. And when it comes to regular people joining us, there's a lot of sentiment, for family separations that happen in our border recently in the last 2-3 years, and it's been in the news forever, but knowing that that has happened for a long time in our border. And I think also there's sort of courageous sentiments of women specifically that want to stand up to Trumpism, or just minorities that want to say enough is enough. So I feel like all of this combined could really give us an opportunity to enter this arena and bring our vision and fill in this narrative gap. I think lastly, with carrying the stories and uplifting the courageous leadership of Ale, Donald, and Lundy, folks like them, they need to be center, as we draft these policies or talk about legislation. And this is a process, a beautiful process that all these organizations in this webinar have embarked to really have humane solutions and solutions that will cut this criminalization that's impacted us for years. Next slide. Hey, Cam, can you move me to the next slide? Thank you.
Sorry, can you, is it the?
Yeah, it's the what can you do? Sorry, I was just not getting it on my screen. So what can you do? So using this momentum that we have and using some of the voices that we have already, I think it's important for us to start calling for bold action from members of Congress and ask them to end this sort of criminal justice to deportation pipeline. We no longer want people that come into contact with the criminal legal system to be deportable. So again, eliminating the controlled substance, such as, ecstasy, which was Lundy's story, and Ale, which was paraphernalia, ground of deportability, that this type of offenses are no longer, a reason to deport a human being. We definitely want them to think of eliminating crimes of moral turpitude that also allows deportability. And those could be like a simple thing as driving under the influence. Changing the sweeping definitions in our immigration laws. Again, the fact that it seems like, our enemies chose a list of behaviors that they just decided was gonna make a person no longer humane and that needed to be disposed and removed of this country. So we want to really establish humane immigration laws. We want for permanent bars to no longer be in existence. We want no automatic deportations. We want no mandatory detention, and definitely create the statute of limitations. Again, people should not be, prosecuted 10, 20, 30 years after these offenses and be like, oh, you did this 30 years ago, you need to be deported now. I feel like all of these bold asks have not been presented to members of Congress. I feel like they've been stuck for a long time in the good versus bad immigrant, and that only like DACA people or young people who are in school or whatever deserve something. And I feel like this is our opportunity to say no. Every non-citizen counts, no matter who they are, no matter what record they may or may not have. And we need laws that reflect humane immigration sort of action. So I feel like when we start to talking to our members of Congress about this in this visionary way, in this bold way, and really getting at the root of a lot of this criminalization and deportation sort of machine that we have, I feel like we're going to be opening them to new possibilities and hopefully inviting them to take courageous action and introducing, legislation language. So next slide. So our first action into this sort of big, bold vision that we're introducing and that we want people to join us in is an open letter to Congress, where we're calling them to overhaul this immigration enforcement system. And of course, the call to repeal 1996 laws. Our timeline is to have this letter open for circulation and for anybody in this webinar, if you're in part of an organization, to sign on. We'll be able to email the sign-on opportunity to the letter next week, and then we'll probably have a month turnaround, or 3 weeks turnaround, so that you can sign on and we could take it to Congress. Of course, the letter highlights our vision for healthy and thriving communities that are no longer harmed by these actions and this type of laws. And again, we are calling for an introduction of legislation that repeals the 96 laws and ends the parts that are that have been the most permanently damaging to our communities. So again, no bail. Having the opportunity for bail is important for folks that are in detention. Automatic deportations of individuals that come into contact with the legal system. Again, they shouldn't be deported because they come into contact with the legal system. Of course, ending the entanglement of immigration officers and local law enforcement. Local law enforcement has become an arm of of immigration enforcement agencies. Again, as you heard Alice's story and Lundy's stories, they were both picked up by ICE in their appointments of probation officers. And that tells you the entanglement that exists and how they work together to remove our folks from this country. And of course, decriminalizing the act of migrating. Again, entering this country or even re-entering this country should not be prosecuted as a criminal act. Migration is a human sort of behavior that has existed for civilizations, and we just don't believe it's a humane response, to asylum seekers or to anyone who's trying to better their lives to be criminalized for the act of moving from one place to another. So again, we're so excited to introduce, this letter to Congress. We want you all to join and to make our voice stronger. And we definitely want to be more bold and visionary and say, you know what? It is time to repeal Fix96, the Fix96 to repeal these laws. It is time for us to stop this mass detention, mass criminalization, and mass removal of our folks. And I feel like we have an opportunity to do that, given that no one is talking about it, given that we have a bold vision, and given that the narrative that it currently exists is nothing positive about immigrants. So we would have to be the ones to elevate this positive, bold, and hopeful vision for all of us. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you can join us in our letter and of course in future actions that we take so Congress can introduce this type of bold bill.
Thank you so much, Carl. And thank you to all the speakers for providing your insight on this important issue. Right now we have Q&A. For folks who are on the Zoom app or on a computer, you can just unmute yourself to ask a question. For folks on the phone, press *6 to unmute yourself. And the floor is open for questions for our speakers. So we have a question for anyone that someone sent us through the chat. So the question is just, what movement, if any, has there been on the 1996 laws? Carl, Paromita, Donald, Lundy, or Ale?
Donald, do you want to start? Can you hear me, Donald?
Yeah.
Okay.
Still on, but why don't you start, Paromita?
Sure. You know, I think over the last, I've been in this work for a while, and what I feel like has been happening over the last several years is a growing recognition of how the criminalization of our immigration laws is very much tied to the sicknesses in our criminal justice system. And I think that growing awareness in both sectors have really built momentum to talk about what these issues are, how can we solve it, and how they've because the need and the impact has been so visceral, has been so devastating over decades that that we can only move forward in this way. And so I'm going to leave it there, but I'd love for others to weigh in.
Yeah, sorry, I was actually, again, technically on the mute thing. Just to follow up on what Paromita is saying, like, the question was, what has been done is that in the past, there have been a couple of, way back in the beginning, in the 90s, there was an attempt by a Republican Congressperson, Bob McCollum, when they realized that how vindictive the bill was, that one of their colleagues' relative actually did get deported, even though they attempted to provide a private bill. So there have been, from the passage of the bill until now, there have been different attempts to either address specific issues about the bill, but also for people to take a look at it. So there have been other attempts of reducing the impact on families, where you'd give U.S. citizen children, you'd give the judges discretion if they had a situation where either parents was going to be deported and leaving back United States citizen children back here. It didn't go too far, again, because of, I believe, limited in scope, instead of attacking the bill at its root. And I think ultimately, when we say repeal 96, it has to be, the goal has to be killing that bill. We can lock off some of the things that we say the immigration bill produced some bitter fruits and some fancy flowers, but if y'all know how plants go, some flowers, they smell good, but they ultimately fail, and they fade. So DACA, TPS, they're beautiful, they're flowers, but they're also temporary, they're not going to last. The 1996 bill is a bitter fruit, and the offspring is what we see now. The enhanced enforcement all over, the arrogance of ICE going in and out of the places they call sanctuary and protected areas. It is going to take a serious fight. But like Carol said, it is Congress who allegedly have the power to change things. So while grassroots and people directly affected will always be lobbying and shouting to say, end it, we have to find a way to make Congress recognize how mad it is and the history of what they have done, some to change it, but some to enforce it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Donald, and thank you, Paromita. A reminder to folks that you can unmute yourselves to ask a question. For folks on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. And if you don't feel like asking a question through the phone or online, you can also just send your message to me through the chat function, and I can read it to the speakers as well. Another question from the chat. Is there any members of Congress who we should be trying to influence? And Carl, Paromita, Ale, whoever wants to take this.
I'll jump on it if nobody wants to.
Mhm.
Well, the folks who've been there, we should take a look at their record of supporting any kind of hard to say, progressive immigration action. The Democrats are allegedly in somewhat of a control, but you have some southern states that really, really need to be pushed. They're still there. They maintain, if not a straight up nativist, if not white supremacist view on immigration, and they need to be changed, whether or not they're Republicans or Democrats or Dixiecrats, whatever they're called. I would suggest, for instance, AOC is pretty good where she's at, but effectively on that appropriations committee, we need to find the people that we can push and bring convincing arguments of how wrong the bill is, but also the offshoots in terms of mandatory detention, the profit motive that it has created. So it's not so much, I think, the Democrats that we need to get in line only, but the hardcore folks who are anti-immigrant, especially the Southern Congress folks.
Great. Another question. Are there strategies to begin to have this conversation from the grassroots level on up? Or more like, how can we begin having this conversation on the local level, and are folks already working on this?
Yes, so I can take that question. This is Carolina. So for the target questions, I do want to share that we do have, a list of prospect targets, but we're looking at, who, like Donald said, who has had a record of progressive votes when it comes to immigration relief, or like even changing some of the provisions that criminalize, non-citizens. But we're looking, folks that participate in like the caucuses of the Progressive Caucus in Congress, or the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, which, they're in charge of, putting some immigration platforms, out there, et cetera. So I feel like as we release our letter and we start pushing specific offices, we'll be able to share more of the targets with you. And if you are a local sort of organization that is part of their district, then it would be amazing for us to connect so we can take action together. For the second question of like strategies and how can we join, the organizations on this webinar are going to probably be very active into doing local actions, or bringing folks to DC to do lobbying, or do like I would say actions in DC. But I did wanted to offer the IJN as a space, which is the Immigrant Justice Network, and we're trying to bring a field sort of arm into this, of organizations that take action with us when we do a lot of this sort of Congress pushing, or pushing to Congress. So we do have a website. You can see our emails, and you should feel free to email us if your organization wants to join or wants to know more about how can we take action together.
I'll also mention that Donald and Lundy's emails aren't listed there, but we'll update the slides, and when we send them around, their email addresses will be listed as well.
Can I respond to the second question?
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, in terms of what's happening on the ground, or what should happen on the ground, we at Families for Freedom hold, and we have always held that unless we traverse the bridge between the other marginalized communities within America, which is the Afro-American, First Nation, and the working poor, our fight is going to be harder if we don't make those connections. So there initially was the CrimIm network, which also included some folks from SEARAC, and stuff like that. There was also the Black Immigration Network. But these networks and these coalitions need to be strengthened. But the underlying impact has to be, we are suffering from the same system, whether or not we are citizens or non-citizens. The class issue and the marginalization is what can bring us together. I think Mi Gente showed a way on a different platform in terms of going on to Georgia and helping with electoral process. Those are the things that ultimately is going to win, because we also need to accept that there's an anti-blackness or anti-immigrantness that is prevalent within the American system. And until we deal with it, whether or not it's from the higher ups, but also, like I said before, African American community, it is going to be a long struggle. So I think also resources should be put into that, traversing the bridges that are already there between Afro and immigrant and First Nation and working poor. Thank you.
Great. We have another question. How can organizations have an active role in this coalition?
Was that aimed at me?
At all of you.
Oh, okay, cool.
I think we need to stay in touch with each other. There's emails at the end. And I think the organizations in this call are really interested and will get back in touch with you. From an organizational point of view, I think Caro's description of the open letter that we plan to circulate is a great way for us to remain connected. We hope that that letter, which will be a letter to call for these 1996 changes, is going to be circulated. And we hope that you circulate it amongst your own networks, and that we can bring enough organizations and add more names on this list so that people really feel like there's a strong constituency right behind the asks in this letter. I think for a long time, we have not been working on putting voices right to the people who've been so directly impacted by this. And I think there is, again, like I said, momentum and interest in this area. So I think the first thing that I would recommend would be for all of us to get together behind this letter and show people in Congress, at least from the very beginning, that there is interest and need for these changes to happen.
Great. Does anyone else want to respond? And then this will likely be our last question just because we're running out of time, but do you have messaging materials that we can use to talk more about this campaign?
Caro, do you want to go for it?
Yes, so we are producing talking points. And I think the best that we could do is attach some of these talking points to, once you sign on to the letter, if you want to bring the letter to like your representatives or any other partners. You are not the first ones to ask for talking points, but we have a team that is developing sort of like what's the narrative and the story that we want to tell about repealing 96. And then what are some talking points that can help you and your organization push this with your representative? So again, the first step is signing on to that letter so then you can have access to the continuum of resources that we know we have to provide for field groups and just anybody that wants to join this fight and go to their members of Congress.
Great. Well, since there are no more questions, thank you all for speaking today, Paromita, Donald, Ale, Lundy, and Caro. And thank you all for joining today's call. We are really heartened to see that there has been so much interest in this webinar that we've had to waitlist people. So again, thank you all. Please be on the lookout for the letter in about a week's time, and we'll also send out the recording and the slides for folks who are not able to join us today. Feel free to contact any of us. Our emails are available on the slide, and I think we'd be happy to talk if you have any questions or want to figure out how you can get more involved. Thank you again, everyone, and take care.
And thank you, Cam, for your organization of this.
Yes, thank you so much, Cam. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Bye.